This may well have been the most important public office in the state, because the commander of the militia was the person charged with defending the community against external attack, which meant typically Indian attack or conceivably attack by the British or the Spanish.
In 1804, Jackson resigned his judgeship to return to his plantation, oversee general merchandise stores and whiskey distilleries he had accumulated, and pursue his real passion, breeding and racing horses. But before Jackson could be tested as a military leader against Indians or the British, his honor would be called into question by a fellow racehorse owner. In 1806, a prominent Tennessee attorney, Charles Dickinson, got into a dispute with Jackson over a bet on a horse. In the heat of the argument, Dickinson called Rachel an adulteress. Jackson challenged him to a duel.
Jackson's honor incorporated everything, including the reputation of his wife. If Jackson did not address it immediately, then his honor would be lost.
Many thought Jackson a fool, as Dickinson was known as the best shot in Tennessee. But Jackson had a daring and risky plan.
Jackson decided in this duel that he wasn't going to try to fire first because he wasn't confident enough of his aim to think that he could hit Dickinson in the heart or in the brain. So he decides ahead of time that he's simply going to stand there and let Dickinson take the first shot at him. Now, as it happened, Dickinson had missed Jackson's heart by no more than about half an inch. The bullet was lodged in Jackson's rib cage.
It's amazing, just a short distance away and Jackson would have been dead. Jackson is supposed to have put his hand to his chest to stanch the bleeding, and very slowly, very carefully, very deliberately, he took aim, fired, and killed him. Jackson, of course, had this chest wound, and he kept the bullet for the rest of his life.
For the first time, groundbreaking digital technology recreates Lincoln for his final unknown story. It didn't happen during his presidency. It happened post-mortem.
We know that the human body begins to deteriorate immediately at death. So it would be very important for a body snatcher or grave robber to act quickly.
It's like breaking in and taking the body of a saint.
This wasn't just a crime, this was sacrilege. This had never happened in American history.
To disturb that relic was an act of gall, almost like the crime of killing him in the first place.
And this is one of the mysteries of the story. We don't know how he came up with this. He came up with the idea of stealing the body of Abraham Lincoln and holding it for ransom in exchange for a full pardon and $200,000. Because if you've got the body of Abraham Lincoln, you might as well go for the whole enchilada. You would think this is a huge crime. It's going to be front page material all across the United States, but it wasn't.
Not only were people saying he wasn't in the tomb, people were saying that his body was missing, or that it wasn't his body in the coffin.
He sure didn't rest peacefully, as it turned out.
The Lincoln story no one knows. Stealing Lincoln's body, Monday, February.
After narrowly surviving his deadly duel with Charles Dickinson in 1806, Andrew Jackson spent 3 months recuperating. He began studying military strategies, hoping to one day prove his abilities as Major General of the Tennessee Militia. When the United States declared war against Britain in 1812, no one wanted to be part of the fight more than Jackson. Even though military commanders in Washington had doubts about the militia, Jackson was ordered to march his 2,000 volunteers toward the port of New Orleans in preparation for a possible British landing and assault. Jackson and his troops set out in January 1813. It took 3 months to cover the first 500 miles. But when the army arrived in Natchez, then part of the Mississippi Territory, Jackson received infuriating news.
He got an order to disband the troops. They weren't needed, and to send them home. The War Department didn't want the troops there. The War Department didn't want to pay to march them back, to provision and march them back. And Jackson was outraged by all of this. How are they going to get home? They didn't have any money. Many of them were sick. So Jackson did what Jackson was pretty good at doing under similar circumstances. He simply defied the orders. And he announced that he was going to march the troops home himself.
A father figure to his troops, most of whom were not yet 20 years old, Jackson paid for provisions out of his own pocket to get his boys home. Jackson himself was in ill health, brought on by the cumulative effects of dysentery, his childhood smallpox, and old gunshot wounds. Even so, the 46-year-old general gave up his horse to transport volunteers too sick to walk on their own.
He didn't have to. He could have ridden on a horse. He could have not gone at all and taken a boat back. But Jackson got up there with the rest of them and got muddy and got the brambles, all of them cutting his face and so forth. And one of these boys, these soldiers, said, "Old Jackson, he's as tough as hickory." Because that was the toughest wood that soldier knew. And the name stuck, Old Hickory. And it stayed with Jackson all of his life.
Jackson made it back to Nashville with his militia intact. It seemed his short-lived military career was over. But another bitter conflict, unknown to most Americans at the time, would change Jackson's fate in dramatic fashion. At the same time the British attacked America in the War of 1812, Red Stick Indians in the Southeast, so named for the color of their war clubs, ceremoniously consumed the black drink, a form of coffee charged with caffeine. Its purpose? To purify and energize warriors before battle. For the Red Sticks, that battle would in fact be all-out war. Following the lead of legendary Northern Shawnee chief Tecumseh, Red Sticks were prepared to fight to the death to control their land. Tecumseh felt strongly that American Indian survival depended on the unity of all tribes fighting white encroachment. But his views caused division within tribes.
What Tecumseh was preaching was frankly nothing less than a race war. This was going to be Indians against whites. Not all the Creeks buy into this. Other Creeks decide that Tecumseh is dreaming, that the Indians will never be able to reclaim their territory. They'll never be able to drive the whites out. And so one of the first results of Tecumseh's efforts is to split the Creek Nation, with the Red Sticks going on the offensive and the other Creeks deciding they don't want to have anything to do with it.
Many Creeks had already adopted the white man's ways.
Some of them actually, if you saw them on the streets, you wouldn't think they were Creek Indians back at that time. You would think they were just plantation owners.
Since Europeans first came to America, many whites married Indians, creating mixed-blood generations.
As soon as white men start to appear, they don't leave their emotions and their lust behind. And frequently they married, especially those who planned to stay for a reasonable length of time.
One of the most respected mixed bloods in the Creek tribe was William Weatherford, 7/8 Scottish and 1/8 Creek. Weatherford believed in Tecumseh and became a leader of the Red Stick Warriors, known as Chief Red Eagle.
He spoke, of course, both the Creek language and English, and he was adept to some extent in both worlds, certainly the Creek world. And he was a very dynamic, well-respected man.
In August 1813, after Red Sticks began attacking settlers and Indian sympathizers, some 550 sought protection inside Fort Mims in what would become Alabama. 300 were white, including 175 militia, and 250, nearly half, were mixed bloods and Creek Indians.